Why do people do good? Why do people do remarkably brave, good things for each other, even for strangers? Mudslides, hurricanes, firestorms, people buried under the rubble of yet another terrorist bombing. Those who rush in, those first responders, they are society's heroes. Their goodness is showing. They are good, and so it gets expressed. If you ever doubted that people are still basically good, if you ever doubted that people are still basically good, then look at this automatic expression of their goodness, this unreasoned, immediate, automatic empathy. In these women and men, we are seeing goodness in action. We are seeing goodness enacted. These people do not weigh the cost. They do not weigh if they'll get hurt or tired or embarrassed or fail. They just jump in with both feet, literally. They jump in. Somebody's in trouble, and that is enough for them to act. One of the things that never seems to get old is seeing people help each other. In the midst of so much that we manage to do that really hurts others, hashtag Me Too, hashtag Time's Up, there are still and always people who go to extremes to help others out. I'm telling you, I can tear up just at the telling of the story of these folks who risk everything, who don't flinch at the thought of helping others if that is required to save a life or rescue anyone, even an animal, or even to give someone a meaningful experience that they've longed to have. Like that little kid who I'm sure you remember hearing about, who lost his whole family in the shooting in that church, I think it was in Texas. His whole family, his parents, his siblings, they were all killed except for him. And a fireman found him lying under a pew in a pool of his own blood. And he wrestled that kid out from under the pew, and he took the kid to the hospital, and every week, again and again, he would go visit him in the hospital. And he kept promising the little kid that if he made it, he would take him for a ride in his fire truck. And the scene on TV the other night was just this kid who lost everything, including his whole family. But there he was, sitting in the cab of that fire truck, beaming, radiant with joy. Or that little guy I think I told some of you about a couple Holy Thursdays ago. Little bitty guy, not little bitty, I guess he was about 8 or 9 years old. But he always wanted to be a priest. He always wanted to be a priest. He talked again and again about being a priest. But he would likely die in the next few months and never realize that dream. And so on that Holy Thursday morning, our Archbishop here in St. Louis put him in a clergy shirt, dressed him in a clergy shirt, put the Roman collar on him. It was way too big for him. And when that part of the Mass where some 200 of us priests stand together and renew our vows, this little 9-year-old stands as tall as any of us have ever stood, as tall as any of us have ever stood. And he stood there in front of us, all of us together. And with us, he professed his faith in God and the church. I was crying so hard I couldn't even renew my own vows. Even the Archbishop wept. It was so beautiful. Over break, I had the chance to catch up on some podcasts that I love but haven't been listening to. And one of them is from a podcast that many of you listen to called Radiolab, and it touched into some of this, and they told a story that I had heard before that is way more dramatic even than those two little stories. But it also tells us something about why people do good. A few years back, when a young man, maybe 6 feet tall, maybe about 180 pounds, was waiting for a subway in New York City, alongside that 50-year-old man, that was a young man, and then next to him was a 50-year-old man who had two of his daughters standing beside him on that same subway platform, 4 and 6 years old. They stood behind him as they waited together for the subway. The young man had some sort of seizure, and he fell onto the tracks just as a train was approaching. There were only seconds to act, and this 50-year-old man jumps onto the tracks, pushed the young man between the rails, threw himself on top of him, and as the train came towards him, first 50 feet away, then 20 feet away, and then just 10 feet away, he pressed his body against that young man, flattened him as best he could as the subway train passed over both of them, just barely scratching the heels of his foot. When the train came to a stop, he could hear his little girls crying, and he just yelled out from underneath those subway cars, "Please tell them Daddy's okay. I'm okay. I'll be up there in just a minute." Why do people do good? All of these folks are on call. They're on call. All of them are first responders. The first reading today in this gospel you just heard references the power of living a life that's on call, that's always on call. Eli, Samuel, John the Baptist, his disciples, Jesus himself, all of them on call, all of them listening for the call that just might come in, and it does. I so imagine that's how the call came from Martin Luther King Jr., whom we celebrate tomorrow. He heard a call rising up out of his own people suffering, and he responded by organizing nonviolent resistance to wake up society to the needs of his sisters and brothers. When you ask these folks why they did what they did, they just kept saying, "I don't know. I don't know why I did what I did. I don't know all the way." That 50-year-old guy with the two girls, though, he said that as he saw that train coming and this guy laying on the tracks, he just heard this voice that just said, "You can do this. You can do this. You'll be okay. Your kids will be okay. You can do this." And he did it. Society gets a pretty bad rap for its greed and selfishness. But I'm here to tell you, ordinary, heroic actions are more frequent than any of us really knows. According to the Carnegie Hero Fund, thousands of times a week this stuff happens in this country alone. Thousands of times a week. Who are these people? Why do their stories touch something so deep in us, even sometimes to the point of tears? What is clear about these everyday heroes, these ordinary heroes, is that people like them don't reason toward this brave action. Reason will only make excuses to not act. Nor is it because they're extremely empathetic. One scientist on this particular podcast proposed that it's not their empathy that made them do it. At least it's not the most empathetic among us who act this way. As a matter of fact, because sometimes the most empathetic people feel pain the most, and then that means they also feel fear of the pain the most, and then do not act. Rather, they suggested, empathy's sort of built into them. Maybe they were raised into it by their parents. Maybe good mentors along the way who were an example of this kind of an empathetic life. Maybe communities, hopefully even like the CSC, helped them realize this in themselves. It became part of them. Empathy was built into them without the need even to feel it for them to act. Not the need to feel it necessarily in that moment, to act, that makes that action possible. The Carnegie Hero Fund defines a hero this way, 6 ways. A civilian who voluntarily leaves a point of safety to risk her or his life to an extraordinary degree to save or attempt to save an ordinary human being. A civilian, somebody unpaid, who voluntarily leaves a point of safety to risk his or her life to an extraordinary degree to save or attempt to save an ordinary human being. Maybe that person will never be us, whose actions are that heroic, but I can say we are all better people because people like that exist. About my own life, I can frankly say that there were times over my 60-plus years that I have been really brave. And there have been times I have been a coward and did not act. I can only resolve to build more deeply into my life that kind of empathy that's so automatic that I don't have to really even think about it. It's just something I do when it comes to acting, when the call comes, when the cry presents itself, when someone's in trouble. And I can believe, I can trust that I am good. I really am good. So that it gets easier and easier to more automatically act as I am, to act good. Almost like walking down the street on a sidewalk. At first, a little kid learns how to walk, and it's a very conscious thing, and everything takes effort. Everything takes a plan. And then it gets so easy, you don't think about walking anymore, do you? You walk down the street, you don't think that you're even walking. It's so automatic until you trip on the sidewalk and fall down. It's like we practice it for a while and then we get good at it. And we don't think about it anymore. That's how empathy can begin to work for us. That's how this goodness gets enacted. We can be prepared for just that moment. The power behind us kicks in, and we act. I can do this, that voice inside will say. I can do this for them. Empathetic action that's immediate and unreflected on. The call comes in and action is required. Why do people do good? Because they are